Officer down! I repeat, officer down!
Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler, a podcast created for a first responder by a first responder. If you are not a first responder, you still are welcome. This podcast is aimed directly at trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is complex and often misunderstood. Our brave men and women who serve our communities often end up with behavioral and psychological issues as a result of experienced trauma from their careers. My goal is to share what I know, my personal experience with PTSD as a retired police officer, and continue to advocate for mental health while providing support to those still in their careers. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical help, and I strongly suggest if you are in fact suffering, you seek out professional medical advice. Please join me on this episode as I continue to expose the reality of PTSD challenges. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to 1033. This is your host, Nathan Kapler. Today we are joined by Daniel Sundahl. He is an artist now who is on the journey of recovering from post-traumatic stress. He has over 20 years of fire and paramedic experience. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks, Nate.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
I'm
doing good today.
Glad to hear the journey of getting to a place where you can finally say that you're doing well.
Yes. Yeah, that for a long time, when people always ask you how you're doing, you don't really want to tell them because they don't really want to know. But yeah, you're right. I can sincerely say that, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good today.
That's awesome.
Which is now my norm.
You deserve it.
Yeah, thank you.
We all deserve it. Now, for me, very excited today to connect with you. We've been talking for a while about you coming on the podcast. And before we dive into kind of the nitty gritty, kind of where you are in life and how you've gotten to the place where you're at right now, I'd like to take a quick moment to let you kind of introduce yourself to some of the listeners that we have over here. I'll give you that stage.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Daniel Sundahl. I guess I'm retired. I'm in transition, so I don't know if I should say I'm a retired or am or currently or was. I'm not quite sure what the proper term is, but I'm in the process of retiring, I guess, as a full-time paramedic firefighter for almost 20 years. And about, probably 10, 11 years into my career, wonky things started to happen to me and some weird symptoms started to affect my life pretty severely. And I was lucky that I recognized it. Actually, I didn't recognize it, but we can get into a little bit later, but something happened. And then I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2014. And then part of my recovery, part of my treatment was to create artwork as a way to purge and process the feelings and emotions that I had. And to my surprise, that many of my peers looked at the artwork and really connected to it through their own experiences, which I thought the exact opposite was going to happen. And now because of that, I get to travel around the world and exhibit my artwork and talk about my experiences with post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress and be on shows like yours. So yeah, it's been quite a blessing.
And an honor to have you. Because in order to have you on the show, I'm now at a point now where I like to bring people who are in that stage of post-traumatic growth. There's some of us that go down the PTSD path. Some of us begin to heal from it. Some of us don't. So again, it's one of those tricky things that I want to make sure that even in the pain and suffering that we may go through in life, we're still having the right people step up and say, yeah, it can look like this, but it can also look like growth too. So I think to have you on the show to express that is, it's going to be a phenomenal episode. To go back to the past of kind of where your journey began. Now, before we pressed record, something that blew my mind is you actually had told me, and this is something that I didn't even know that exists, but your 20 years of fire is not just 20 years of fire service, it's fire and paramedicine. You're also a paramedic. So you actually wear two caps at the same time. So kind of a new thought for me, but you actually had let me know that in Alberta, this is actually fairly common in some of your smaller centers. So before getting into kind of even just that, where does your journey begin? Like, whether it's as a young child or later on in your teenage years, like where do you now start to look at the world and say, hey, this is what I want to do with my life?
Okay, that's a big question. Yeah, so we are fire EMS based. So I work 24 hours on the fire truck, or my shift was 24 hours on the ambulance. Then I'm off for 24 hours. Then I come back to work 24 hours on the fire truck, and then I'm off for 5 days. It's a great schedule. And there are a lot of departments that work that way. We're a pretty small department, but it's very dynamic, and it's very, you don't really get bored, or you don't really get stuck, because there's always things happening. 24 hours in the ambulance is I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty rough shift, but we only do it 4 times a month when you kind of work out the math of it. So it's great. And then to go on the fire truck, it's just more dynamic. It's more interesting. It's more, I think it's great for longevity, because you have a lot more options, and you're doing more things, and you're training on different things all the time. And mind you, the majority of the calls we did on the fire truck were medical anyways. But I really enjoyed doing paramedic stuff on the fire truck. Often we were there first, and I really enjoyed that part of the job, doing both. It's great. And got lost track of my mind. What was the other part of your question?
Yeah, how did you get into it? Like, where did this form in your life where you wanted to get into this role, and kind of why?
Okay, so I was working I was training as a dive master in the Cayman Islands. This is in probably the early 90s, late 80s. So I was living in the Cayman Islands, working as a bartender, and everyone is a diver in the Cayman Islands. So I really enjoyed it, and started doing some more training, and was doing some dive master training. And part of the dive master training program was rescue diving and first aid, and how to rescue people that are either having medical events or traumatic events in the water. And I really enjoyed that. So that was my first introduction to CPR and artificial respiration and trauma care and bleeding control and that type of stuff. And I really enjoyed it. One day on my way home from school, I saw this guy get hit by this massive dump truck on the middle and walking across the street. And I got so excited. So I pulled over my car. I ran up to this guy thinking, I'm going to help this guy. And this guy was folded in half, like his feet were up by his face and was gurgling blood. But man, I was so excited, thinking, I learned how to do CPR, or I learned how to take someone on the water. And I came up to them, I'm like, I have no idea what to do. Like, I don't know what to do in this situation. So I did nothing, and he was unconscious. And then the paramedics came and unfolded him and took him away. And I'm like, wow, that's really exciting. I think maybe I should be a paramedic. Like, that's not the normal reaction, I don't think, to have when you see that. So that was kind of the first introduction that I thought maybe a life of emergency services might be for me. And I was right. It certainly was. And I think once I thought about it, I was always wanting to live a full life. And that's why I traveled quite a bit. I wanted to experience as much as I could. And I thought, being a paramedic, it's the biggest show on earth, really. And that didn't disappoint. Right? I have no regrets about being a paramedic for 20 years. And I certainly saw a lot of things. So that's kind of how it started. So then I did that. Early 1990s, I went to school and became an EMT, or now we call it a primary care paramedic, in Alberta. And then I became an English teacher. Then I traveled the world being an English teacher. And then I came back in early 2000s and got my advanced care paramedic, and have been working full time doing that ever since.
The ability to, and obviously there's a lot of people out there that are drawn to this space because they want to help others in some form, right? Whether they're going through an uncomfortable time, or they're in a moment of trauma, physical trauma, like you had mentioned. Sounds like a fairly defining moment where you really kind of see why maybe you're here on this earth. And that's hopefully to help others to navigate some of those complex things. And I think that was something that might have been building too, since the time of diving and helping others and making sure you're looking after others. And it's providing service to others in that is a very noble thing. And it definitely steered you in that direction. So the kind of person that you were, could you reflect on who you were as far as your compassion for others, and just your day-to-day mood?
Back then?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm going to be completely honest, Nate, and I'm not going to, like, I will be totally truthful. That's part of my process and my healing is that I need to be authentic and totally open and honest with people. And I know many people get into this profession to say they want to help people. And that's what I wanted to do, but that was not the main reason I wanted to become a paramedic, to be honest. The real reason I wanted to become a paramedic is because I wanted to live a full life and experience crazy things. I really wanted to have as many experiences. I wanted to live life on the fringe, so to speak, is what motivated me to become a paramedic. And yeah, it's very fulfilling to help people, but that's not the main reason why I wanted to do it. Full disclosure, right? So and it didn't disappoint, right? And I would never discourage people from wanting to become a paramedic or be in health services, because the satisfaction and the reward that I received from helping other people was incredible. But that is also, for me, living life on the fringe and living a full life is part of that being of service to others, because that is also very rewarding. But I'm not going to say the reason that I wanted to help other people. That wouldn't be true. It's just part of the reason, but not the main reason. Right. And that's, and that really, my life really hasn't changed that much that way. I still want to live a full life, as live life on the fringe. And so that when I'm on my deathbed, I'm going to look back and think, yeah, I did some crazy things in my life. That's what I want. That's the experience I want to have. So any opportunity I get to do something, I'm usually up for it. And that really hasn't changed. But after doing it for 20 years, my bucket's kind of full, and I'm on to my next career path, which is going to be this is going to sound funny, but now my next path, after saying that I didn't do it to help people, I'm going to be a trauma therapist, which is of course to help other people, which is what I really want to do. So now I think what has changed, like in my early 20s, I really did want to live a full life and have an exciting life. But now I'm 55 years old. Now I think I do want to help. I do have a passion now to help fellow emergency workers that experience the same things that I have and help them navigate through that. But currently I don't have qualifications to do that, apart from being their peer and sharing my successful events that brought me through recovery. So apart from sharing that, I really don't have much else to offer. When I know that's very powerful, peer support is very powerful. But now I'm going to go back to school. I start next month for a 2-year program where I'll be a registered counseling therapist. And I'm going to specialize in emergency workers and do trauma therapy and substance abuse and addiction and spousal support, that kind of stuff.
Good for you. Regardless of the reason how you got into what you did, whether it was to help others or to live on the fringe, as you call it, you did very much get to a point in your life where you now are giving back and serving others, and very noble too of you to go back now and to not only as someone with lived experience who's healed through art, and I'm sure you're going to continue with your own artwork as well.
Oh yeah,
while you continue to give back and help others from a therapy position. Can we talk about living life on the fringe? Why was that so important for you?
I've always been that way. Ever since I was young, I really wanted to, I had some force in me that really wanted to live a fulfilling life. And that's really it's been a driving force for me for a long time. Right out of high school, I started traveling, and I've lived in several countries around the world and experienced lots of things. And um, I don't know, and it still isn't. And I think many emergency workers are like that. If you say like the A-type personalities, where we're adrenaline junkies, or we want excitement, or we want to live. I did an art piece called "The Biggest Show on Earth," where it's this paramedic, and he's standing outside this big circus tent, and on top of the circus tent it says EMS. And I think the narrative that I said was, we did 24-hour shifts, where today I'm going to walk in to work, even after 20 years, I don't know what I'm going to see. I never can predict the calls I'm going to see. And I'm always surprised. And I'm going to go to work for 24 hours, work on that ambulance, and see incredible things, tragic and wonderful. And then at the end of my shift, I'm going to leave that tent, leave that circus, and come back home. That transition is sometimes difficult to make, but that's how I saw it. And it didn't really disappoint to be in that profession. That's why I will never discourage someone from doing that, because the experiences I've had, although, well, they almost killed me, really. I now appreciate the benefits of my experiences in the world of EMS and emergency services and firefighting.
One of the beautiful things right now, even in this moment, is, and this happens with podcasting, you need to check your ego very, very quickly. And you said, no, Nate, this is actually more of how my story unfolded. And you actually challenged to give you feedback. You challenged me in that moment to kind of reflect on, okay, this is his perspective, his story. Was this also a part of mine too? And something that maybe I hadn't acknowledged over the years was very much I guess in a sense too, I was a bit of a thrill seeker as well. Right? Because if you sign up to become a law enforcement officer and you get to drive a car fast or have a gun in your hand and possibly use it and do some abnormally thrill-seeking charged events, it takes a very special person to do that. And I think for me too, I guess I would have to admit to you, I guess maybe part of the reason why I joined to become a police officer as well was that element was very much a part of my story as well, and not just the compassion helping people. So thanks for sharing that. I actually kind of sat with it for a moment and kind of said, okay, I need to take this in and see where it lands even in my own story. And I never actually had looked at my own that way. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The journey now into being a paramedic and a firefighter, let's take a moment to go back to when you jumped into those roles or those positions. What were some of the things that you were seeing? Some of maybe the trauma, the traumatic calls. What were you noticing around with like the people that might have been in the years of service and you were kind of seeing in them? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, early on in my career, I would see, the salty paramedics and the salty firefighters. They just seemed to be angry all the time, at work. Or I was the practical coordinator. I always enjoyed taking students on as a paramedic. So we had, I usually had students with me and my partner. And we were at the emergency room, and this paramedic that's been a paramedic for a really long time, he just started ripping into my student saying, why are you doing this? Get out of it now. Like, he just was telling her to quit now. And I'm like, hey man, that might be your attitude. Don't project it on other people. It says, maybe it's time for you to get out. If that's how you feel about it, you need to, that's a you problem, not my student's problem. And then I really had to sit down with my student and say, hey, look, his journey is completely different. He's projecting stuff on you of his own experiences, and who knows what his career has been like. But I think I would see that often with, and I'm very conscious of that. I don't want to be that guy. I love the profession, and it was very rewarding for me. And people would ask, why do you, when I was still in it and I started creating the artwork, they say, why do you stay in this job if it's so traumatizing for you? I'm like, well, there's many rewards too. Many rewards. And again, this is going to sound weird, but full disclosure again, I made a vow to myself to be open and honest with everybody. And I'm that way with my artwork as well. And I think that's why many people connect to it, because they recognize that it's authentic. But I think, being with somebody, holding their hand or being with them while they're dying, that is an absolute privilege. I think that is a unique perspective that majority of people in the world never get to experience. Now, of course, I'm going to do my protocols and try to say, but I've been in that situation several times. I've delivered babies. It's something I don't think any other profession could provide for me. And those experiences are incredibly rewarding. And it's such an incredible privilege to be there at the start or end of life for somebody, I think. All right. And that's when somebody would die in the back of the ambulance. Even though I was trying to do what I, follow my protocols and do what I had to do. And they died anyways. I always tried to not forget about my patient and be present with them while I was doing my work. And after those events, I would go home and I would reflect on those. And those were again, this will be weird. Those are positive experiences for me. When I look back on those, I don't criticize myself thinking that what could I have done differently to save them. I'm like, no, the reason they died is because they were crushed by a semi. That's why they died, not because I didn't put a big enough IV in them. So when I reflect back on those experiences, those aren't the experiences that haunt me. Those aren't the experiences that caused my trauma. For me, it was more the human suffering. Those are the things that I'll be happy not to experience anymore. But those moments, either bringing life into the world or being with people as they leave the world, if they're not suffering, those are memories that I'll cherish forever.
Well, I can reflect even on my own journey. There was a few lives that had ended while I was with someone, and this actually happened very early on in my service, and I talk about it on season 1. Somebody that had been hit by a cab and unfortunately was on the way of not making it. And as an older man now, I don't think I carried some guilt over, what could I have done in that moment to help him. But as you age and your perspective grows and you heal from PTSD, you get to a better place where you do recognize some of the good that came from that call, that you were able to give that person comfort while they were taking their last breath. And really, what better gift to give someone on the way out is to let them know that they are not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're often in those situations, which are the most serious, critical, that is the fringe of life, really. Our training kicks in and sometimes we lose perspective of, we're rushing to try to say, as we should, do what we can to prolong it or get them to the surgeon's table. And I guess it's difficult to do both, to show some type of compassion while you're racing to save them. It's definitely a high stress situation. But the problem for me, I think, as the years went on, I started to see those events as less abnormal and more normal, right? So it would be, oh, here's just another dying guy, or it just seemed, I didn't recognize them as abnormal situations anymore. I saw them as normal situations, the trauma and the suffering, and, these calls that I at one point thought were, these high acuity, low occurrence calls became high acuity, high occurrence calls for me, where it was just normal. People dying is normal. That's a normal. And when that started happening, when I started to see it that way, I think that's when a lot of the symptoms for me started to kick in, where I no longer felt that this is an incredible experience. This is a really unique thing that's happening over years and years and years of doing it. I'm like, yeah, there's nothing. People die all the time. People are dying every day. This isn't really unique or abnormal or weird at all. There's evil people out there. That's just normal. People do horrible things to other people. I started to see it as a normal. It didn't shock or surprise me. I never got excited anymore no matter what the call was. I never got my heart rate up, no matter what it was. I think that's when things started to change for me.
How far into service life were you by that point when you started to notice? And I'm sure too, there was parts of change that happened that you maybe didn't notice in the moment, but so it's kind of a tricky question to answer, right? But because there's two questions built into that, the part where you become aware as to the change that's now happening, and to what does the change look like before you were aware?
That's the scary part of my story is I didn't really know. I really wasn't aware of the changes that were happening. For me, I didn't have that one event where, okay, well, I had that one call, and since that one call, I've changed. I didn't have flashbacks. I didn't have nightmares of that one event where I was normal, and then I had that one event, and then I was impaired with PTSD because of that acute event. That didn't happen to me. And I always thought that that's how PTSD worked. I thought, well, I never thought that I would even have trauma because I never really had that one call that really haunted me until I heard this psychologist talk. So back in 2014, our city, which is very progressive now when I think about it, they employed a psychologist to come and speak to everybody in the city, not just emergency services, about trauma and stress. And as he was talking about PTSD, I was on shift. So our captain said, okay, we got to go listen to this guy talk. And we're all like, oh, we got to go listen to the psychologist talk about PTSD. We're all too cool for that. And as I'm listening to him talk about all the signs and symptoms, I'm like, holy crap, I recognize myself in all of them. And then he said that many of his patients, he diagnosed with PTSD because of long continuous stressors instead of the one event, where you can get these symptoms from a long career of constant stressors. And that was a really mind-blowing statement for me because I never really thought I had it because I never had that one event. So after that, I went and got assessed and was diagnosed with PTSD. So I had PTSD, didn't even know it. And I had symptoms. I was suicidal at that time. And I didn't even know. At that time, I thought, I will kill myself and then I'll be okay. Because what I didn't recognize was that my brain chemistry had changed so much through all this trauma that I had lost the capacity to realize what was happening. And that's, my artwork, I use demons as trauma, and that's the lie that trauma did for me, is that it tricked me and came on slowly and gradually to the point where I almost killed myself, not knowing. I had lost the capacity to realize how much trouble I was in. I didn't know that I had PTSD until I heard that guy talk. I'm like, oh, hey, maybe it's not normal to be thinking about ending my life. Maybe that's not a normal thought process to have, thinking that, oh, suicide is this cozy blanket I'm just going to wrap myself in and then I'll be okay. But clearly that's not how it works. So when I think about it now, yeah, it's pretty terrifying that it snuck up on me that way. And nobody knew. I didn't even know. So how am I supposed to ask for help? Right? How am I supposed to ask for help or take advantage of my employment assistance programs if I thought I was okay? Because my brain was altered. I didn't know that I was in trouble. Right. So yeah, it was pretty scary for me. And I'm really, that being on shift that day, listening to that psychologist really saved my life.
When were you diagnosed with PTSD?
2014.
And when did you join EMS, fire?
2000. Well, I became a paramedic in beginning of 2002.
Yeah, that is a substantial amount of time that has passed. That's 11 years. 11 years of a very demanding, traumatic, fringe job, as you would put it. Now, to go back a couple of steps here, you talk about human suffering as part of the trauma that really bothered you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I talk about human suffering, I don't actually mean the human suffering of my patients. Um, it's the human suffering of their family members and people that love them that are there and witnessing what's happening. That's what really got to me. And that I reflect that quite a bit in my artwork. Often in my experiences, if we are at a scene where people are dying, I didn't have that many people that died that were suffering, which sounds weird. But the suffering that I did see was after telling family members that their loved one had died, right? Or bystanders that have witnessed horrific events. Those are the things that really, that's what sticks with me. And seeing how it affects, the living. Those are the things that really, those are the things that I have nightmares about. Those are the things that I would, that would haunt me. And those are the things that I reflect in my artwork quite a bit, because that's where my bucket got filled, was were those types of things, was the human suffering of sometimes my patients, but usually it's the family members and people around, mothers. Yeah, those are the, drowning kids with their SIDS babies, and being in the room with mothers that are experiencing that. That's horrible. So those are the things that really kind of affected me.
What kind of training did you have to be able to give those next of kin news events?
Yeah, death notifications, that's none. I didn't get any, right? I didn't get school. We didn't get any. But now there's lots. I have a good friend in California who's has a program about death notifications, and I share her program, Alexandra Jabber, and she's out of California. She's a paramedic firefighter there. She's getting a doctorate right now in the effects of ketamine on firefighters. But that's her passion, is death notifications. So she has a program, she has a course that she does, and it's fantastic, where she really gets deep into, this is how you do it. Because I don't know what it's like now when you go to school for, emergency services, for police and, paramedics, or even, doctors, but there is a way to do it properly. And I've done lots of artwork specifically about that now too.
When I was in depot, we had some actors come in, and we would go in and we would say, hey, someone's passed away. We would give the next of kin. And it was a controlled setting, right? So there wasn't really that true element of realism. When I stepped out into the field and then started to give next of kins, even having had been trained slightly for a brief window of my training to be able to do that, you're right. The emotion that comes out of those people and the pain is very real. Yeah,
like that is true human suffering right there. I think in my experiences, again, and it's incredible what the mind can do, where, I've done that, where their mind, it elevates so much to them that their mind takes over. Then they switch, like psychologically, the stuff that happens to some people when they hear that news is really crazy. How the mind protects itself, where I'd have to tell them over and over, because their brain wouldn't compute, or they wouldn't accept what I was telling them. And I don't have the tools to deal with that. I don't know how to, and I worry, and I'm pretty sure I did earlier on in my career, cause more damage to these people than was necessary. Because that is a critical, what I've learned now is that is a critical time for those family members, where you have the opportunity to really set how they're going to remember that event for the rest of their lives. And you can either make it much better for them, or you can make it much worse for them based on what you say. And I've learned that now, but earlier on in my career, I'm pretty sure I messed up a lot of families because I just didn't know what I was doing.
You were never given the training either. So I'm
No.
always very cautious on how people will hold guilt, especially through their words and how they express things. So not calling you out for that statement, but you did the best you could.
Yeah, and I recognize that. Like I didn't, um, I did do the best I could. I didn't
Yeah.
know, right? But people default to what we think is going to be the best thing. Sometimes isn't what they need to hear.
Yeah. Again, even my own journey, as I reflect on kind of what that looks like for me, it's something I've never really dove into. But yeah, it's a very painful period to recall some of those memories because they're there. Now, you I'm losing my train of thought. The human suffering and in that pain, how were you handling and how were you processing some of the things that were happening, specifically emotion or the reaction or some of the things that were happening to you? How were you dealing with that?
Well, I think over time, it started to, I think psychologically to protect myself, I was just shutting down, right? I was shutting down and I didn't want to process it. So it really is, I started getting really numb. I wasn't feeling anything. Uh, and so when I would come home, I would still feel nothing, right? I had the sense I stopped feeling joy. I stopped feeling happiness. I stopped feeling many things. But I'd be very easy to anger. My fuse got pretty short. I started to isolate myself. It's almost like I didn't want to make decisions. I didn't want to feel anything. So I was trying to not feel anything. And the result of that was, isolation, not showing love for my wife because I'm trying to protect myself from, because if I start feeling stuff, then the effects of what I've seen are really going to start to creep in, and then I'm in trouble, and then plus, as emergency workers, we have a job to do. So when we're at work, we can't, if we're trying to save somebody or we're trying to manage an emergency scene, we can't get too emotional. Otherwise, we won't be able to do our jobs. So we have to build a wall there in order for us to do our job. But the problem is that sometimes those walls go up and they stay up. They did for me. Uh, but it changed from keeping them up to do my job to keeping them up to protect myself, where I didn't want to feel anything, sweeping stuff underneath the rug until eventually my body said, well, if you're not going to deal with this, Dan, then we're going to make you deal with it. So some of the weird stuff that started happening for me, I started to hear things. I started to get visions. I started to, my memory started to lapse. What took me off guard is that I started having these really weird disassociation symptoms where I would feel like I was doing a ride along with myself on the ambulance, where I would be with my patient, but I would feel like I was a third person in the back of the ambulance, right? So I didn't feel present for my patient. I couldn't recall my protocols. I couldn't recall drug dosages. I stopped remembering what I was supposed to do. And then I recognized that, okay, this is a problem. My memory, things that would just pop into my head normally wouldn't be there. And then I started hallucinating. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see the Grim Reaper standing at the foot of my bed. I would hear voices, and yeah, so it really started to have these physical manifestations. I started getting pain and numbness in my arms, and it really started. My brain decided, okay, well, if you're not going to do anything, I'm gonna do something about this, and then it kind of forced me to. Luckily, by the time those serious symptoms, and my path is really weird because I was first diagnosed in 2014, and that's when I started doing the artwork. Right, the artwork was a result of that, and then recently, just over the past couple of years, it kind of resurfaced. But because I have know more about trauma, and I started recognizing these signs that were coming in. But over the last couple of years, it started coming back a lot more intensely, and that's what kind of got me off the car with all these new symptoms of hallucinations and hearing voices and stuff, which didn't happen to me initially in 2014. But at least I recognized what was happening to me, and then got treatment again and recovered again. And now I'm doing good again.
The physical sensations are the body's way of telling you, and I loved how you phrased it. If you're not going to do something about this, the body will start to exhibit signs, behavioral patterns, physical symptoms, and derail you, because it just cannot continue to go down that path anymore. One thing I'm going to come back quickly to, Daniel, is compassion fatigue and burnout. Is that something that you see in yourself now, maybe as you look back at maybe when parts of the journey you started to recognize you're now becoming numb?
Well, burnout's different than PTSD, right? So burnout, those symptoms will lessen, as you're away from what's causing that burnout. Whereas, with PTSD, those symptoms will stay, for, over 30 days, according to the DSM-5, right? So it's, I'm pretty sure I probably had a combination of both. The good thing about our department being integrated is that I wasn't on the ambulance all the time, or I wasn't on the fire truck all the time. There was variety, which I really think helped me stay in the profession as long as I have. They always say that the average lifespan for career span, I should say, for a full-time paramedic is 3 to 7 years. After that, you're done. That's whoever they are. But for me, after 20 years, and I still miss the work. I still crave it, and it's I think for me, because we're integrated and we kind of did both, as a bit more dynamic work. But I still think after 20 years, I probably had a little bit of burnout. But we had a lot of vacation time too, right? If I'm a senior guy there, and I'd take one tour off, and I was off for 2 weeks, and usually that would work, right? But sometimes I would take a tour off and still not want to go back to work after 2 weeks. So I think that was maybe a little bit of burnout there. But again, I'm not a mental health professional yet, but I'm guessing if you're off work, if you take a month off or a couple of months off work, that should maybe solve the burnout issue, but may not necessarily solve your PTSD issue.
And what about the compassion fatigue? Is there any part of your journey where you look back and you kind of see where that may have happened, or was that not something for you?
Yeah, no, the compassion fatigue, I think that was a big thing for me. Like that's, I feel I'm pretty empathetic, and I can sense people's feelings, which I think made me a really good paramedic. But I think it, because of that, I took on a lot of emotion from other people, and that really that affected me quite a bit over time. But initially, that's kind of why I wanted to do it in the first place, right? I wanted to experience extremes of life, and that's what I did. And I think over time that really, again, I keep saying, my bucket got full and it started to spill over.
The suicide. How do you understand suicide now in the relationship that you may have had with suicide?
Yeah, suicide's that's a big question. For me, I altered my brain chemistry, and I've done a lot of artwork on this, and I don't think people understand. A lot of people, they apply a mental mindset to someone who has completed suicide, right? So they think, well, how can they do that? How can they leave their family? How can they, they're cowards. How can they took an easy way out? How can they do that? Well, that's all applying a healthy mindset, a healthy brain chemistry to someone that supposedly didn't have healthy brain chemistry. Like for me, when I was in that position, I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to leave my family. I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. I thought if I ended my life, I'd be okay. That's where my brain was. I look back at it now, I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. That, when you take your life, that's it. You're done. But that's not what I was thinking, because I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. Every day it would be, I'd wake up and then I'd just feel like this hand is just crushing me all the time. And at nighttime, it was worse, because at nighttime, when I slept, I didn't have my consciousness to defend myself. So I'd have horrible nightmares, I'd have horrible dreams. So it was a constant barrage 24 hours a day. And to the point where I just didn't want to feel anything anymore. Right? It wasn't that I, wanted to leave my family, or I just didn't want to feel anything anymore is what I wanted. And I felt suicide was just, again, this cozy blanket, and I did an art piece on that. And then there's a lot of stigma around suicide too. So I think suicide is just that mindset. It's an understanding of what people are, and that's something I really want to get into when I start doing my training, is how that develops and what people are thinking, knowing I have this one art piece. It's my favorite art piece. It's called The Demon Eats the Ambulance Driver. And people think it's really graphic and it's really gory. And it's this demon and I call it ambulance driver on purpose, where this demon's eating the head of this paramedic. It's like chewing his head off. And that picture represents the act of suicide, where that paramedic is succumbing to his injuries. So he is deciding, okay, I don't want to feel anything anymore. His arms are down. He's not defending himself. He's accepting it. So that is the paramedic succumbing to his injury. It's like if you were in a traumatic injury and you died, 3 days later, where in this case, this paramedic had a traumatic injury and he died 20 years later, right? He's succumbing to that injury. And that's what it was, is he's literally being consumed by his trauma. His trauma is devouring him. And then I have an opposite picture called Finding Peace, where this paramedic is forehead to forehead with an angel, which I use for recovery, symbols of recovery. And in that picture, it's the cover of my second art book. But what a lot of people don't notice of that art piece, in the top right-hand corner, I ghosted in a devil and he's screaming. You don't notice it right away. But the reason that trauma is screaming is because that paramedic found whatever it was, his recovery, whatever that is. So the two of them, when I present those two pictures, I do them together as opposing possibilities of what my pathways were. That's the fork in my road. Am I going to be the ambulance driver that's no longer a paramedic being consumed by my trauma? Or am I going to find what my recovery is, rewire my brain through therapy, and through rewiring my brain, alter my perspectives and become a better person than I was before my trauma? And that's the path I took. And that's where I am now. I'm a different person than I was before my trauma.
You have to be a different person.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it the same way anymore. The suicidal ideation, there's so many different levels to suicide. Suicidal ideation, where you think about no longer wanting to be here because of the pain and suffering that you're going through, or the actual final act of taking your own life. And I'm sure there's a few other stages of that as well. Again, I'm not a mental health professional, but we both know enough about the journey that we can speak to it from some lived experience. And you're absolutely so clear and articulate on suicide. And the reason I started talking years ago was because 2 cops had taken their own lives. And I finally said enough, because nobody understood it. We kept just talking about, oh, cops are taking their lives. It's such a shame. Well, there actually is no shame behind the event, because that cop has been struggling with so much pain, or firefighter or paramedic or whatever the case is, that first responder has been struggling with so much pain and suffering from serving their community that they no longer know how to live. They no longer know how to feel anything. And all they feel is that pain and suffering of the things that they've been through. So a solution to ending that becomes, if you're not meeting it with addiction, it can sometimes be suicide, or it can be other behavioral choices that just are completely unhealthy.
Yeah. And then you feel that you're a burden on people, right? Because you recognize that you're not yourself. that your family would be better off without you, right? That's what you tell yourself. That's what the trauma tells you. That's what the altered brain chemistry tells you. And then you start to lose perspective and capacity to get yourself out of there.
It's a very dark and very scary place. I like the art and how you've chosen to represent the fork in the road. You can either lean into one aspect of the avenue or the other. And some of us, unfortunately, do take our own lives. And I mean, that I hope one day ends and we no longer have any more suicides related to service life, men and women.
Yeah.
Fascinating topic within PTSD. And I don't think I've actually approached suicide to this degree or depth. So I really appreciate you going full vulnerability on this one. And again, I'll meet you in that space too. I had my own issues with suicidal ideation where I no longer wanted to be here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the pain and suffering. And it wasn't until I started to lean into the angel and do the therapy and really start talking and understand kind of why I was feeling that way or the thoughts that I was having at the time because of the pain and suffering that I was going through, was I able to actually challenge it and start to do things differently.
Yeah. And everyone's journey is different. Everyone's pathway is different. Everyone experiences trauma differently. It's very unique. It's definitely not black and white, right? It's definitely not you break your leg, this is the surgical procedure to fix that. It's like you break your mind. Okay, well, we need to dive in there a little bit to see what your procedure to fix that's going to be. And that's where it kind of gets tricky, right? What's going to work for you? Well, the first thing is either recognizing or having someone reach in and pull you out and say, hey man, it's not, there's other solutions. You don't need to end your life. There's other things you can do. And potentially this could be an opportunity, silver lining around the dark cloud, that here's an opportunity for you to rewire your brain, really change up your perspectives through the therapy. And you might come out a different, better, in the end, that better person in the end. And I see it all the time. I've met so many emergency workers where even yourself, Nate, you're an example. Look what you're doing now. You know, you are an example of post-traumatic growth. The trauma that you experienced, you've converted that into this podcast, right? And that's a you're a living example. We're both living examples of post-traumatic growth. And I think for those people that are in that dark place, where they wake up and they put on their I'm okay suit to everybody, and they're expending so much energy fooling everybody, trying to convince everyone that they're okay, still being an effective police officer and an effective firefighter and paramedic or nurse or communications but that takes a lot of energy. That, you know, if they can see examples like you and me or Batman or Spider-Man or Wonder Woman or all these superheroes that are born out of trauma, that there's hope. You know, there's hope where you can use this trauma to really to your advantage. It's really difficult to see it that way, right? So
thank you. Yeah, thank you for the post-traumatic growth, recognizing kind of, I guess, where I am in my own journey and how talking for me has been very similar to the art that you've produced. Eventually, we have to find a way in order to heal ourselves, whether it's through communication and talking or art or using that creative ability to build something or do something just to get everything that you've been storing in out. And I had no idea where this project was going to go when I started a podcast talking about trauma and mental health within first responders, but here we are. This is an absolutely beautiful space, getting to meet people like yourself that are also in the post-traumatic growth. So for one, thank you for the comment and recognizing kind of where I'm at, but also thank you for your own journey and not only trusting and healing yourself, but eventually healing with your art. Now we've talked a lot about the PTSD and the trauma that came into your career, and some of the physical sensations that you went through. At what point did you know that you needed to do things differently, and how did you challenge yourself to really dive into, okay, how do I explore healing?
Well, that's the scary thing for me because I didn't know, right? I didn't recognize, I just thought I was having a bad day. And I always would tell myself, well, tomorrow, I'll be better tomorrow. I'm just sad today. But each day just got worse and worse, and it never got better. So I didn't recognize that in myself until I heard that psychologist talk and then get diagnosed. And then he kind of says, "Hey, Dan, you shouldn't have thoughts of suicide. That's not a normal, thoughts, having no joy in your life. That's not a normal thing. These are," he kind of explained to me, "No, man, you are traumatized. You have a traumatic injury. Um, we need to repair that." Right. And that was a mind opening experience for me. That really kind of made me realize that, I'm injured. I'm not just sad. I'm not just depressed. I've got an injury, and there's a way to fix it. So I went through all the testing and all the evaluations, and then started on that pathway to recovery. And like I said, it's not like a broken leg where it's pretty definitive of what the treatment is. For everybody, it's quite a bit different, and sometimes it's really difficult to discover what that is. That's going to be that recovery. And there's tons of things coming out all the time. There's lots and lots and lots of different recovery methods out there. The problem is once you're in that space, it's difficult to navigate that when you're impaired with trauma, to find what your treatment's going to be. It's difficult to do by yourself. So I always tell people that if you're having symptoms or you feel like can relate to, after I do my talk, if you relate to them, get assessed. If you have the ability or if you have the resources to be evaluated by a psychologist that is trained, maybe specifically with emergency workers, to get a diagnosis of, okay, maybe you're just burned out. Maybe you have clinical depression. Maybe you do have PTSD. Once you know what it is, then you can get the appropriate treatment for it. And for me, it was artwork. Like that's what my psychologist and I thought it was a horrible idea. He says, "Dan, I think you need to get these things out of your head. Why don't you do that through the photography you're doing?" And I'm like, "That's a horrible idea. Like, wow, I'm trying to sweep everything under the rug. I'm trying to forget this stuff. And you're telling me that you want me to photograph it and paint and draw. That's way more time than I want to spend on this stuff. I'm trying to forget about it." And he goes, "Trust me, just try it." And it worked. I guess that's why they get paid the big bucks. So and essentially what happens is I still have many calls I need to process and get out, but the way my process works is that I'll have an emotion or a feeling that pops in my head all the time. And I think about it and I meditate on it a little bit. And then an image of that complex idea pops into my head. And then I will stage that scene with my coworkers, or when I travel with my fellow emergency workers. I photograph it, then I digitally draw and paint what I feel about that on top of that photograph. And it takes a long time to do. And during that process, I'm purging it out of my head and trapping it into this art piece, this two-dimensional image. And then it no longer pops into my head after that when I've completed it. So it's very personal to me. The artwork that I create is very personal to me. That type of artwork is very personal to me. And I don't create it for other people. I'm not thinking, okay, what are people going to like? What are people going to relate to? It's not that at all. I need to do this to recover. This is part of my healing process. I don't create it for other people, but I'm lucky that my peers look at it and they will attach their own experiences to it. And sometimes they'll think, okay, well, this one, I don't think many people are going to get this one. And, I post it, and sure enough, almost the more unusual I think it is, the more it connects with other emergency workers, because they also have had a similar experience that maybe they haven't talked about or expressed. And then they see it in this art piece, and maybe that makes it more real for them. I don't know, but I'm very lucky that my peers, most of my peers, or shouldn't say most, some of my peers connect with my artwork that way.
For you, we're going to gloss over a couple things because we're almost pushing an hour already. And amazing. This is turning out to be a fantastic podcast for one. But I also want to make sure we don't keep you well into your senior years at the same time. So
I'm almost there already.
You're almost, exactly. And for the people that don't know it, we've been taking a lot of pee breaks. That's what happens when you
talking about senior years. Yeah.
Senior years. Whoops, sorry. Now, for you, when you embrace that, okay, I obviously have this PTSD, I'm diagnosed, I need to look at challenging myself and no longer sweeping this under the rug and leaning into trusting another individual, i.e. your mental health team, your psychologist who says, Daniel, you need to start doing something with this. And art might be the thing for you to get it out, right? For you obviously had to challenge yourself, and you recognize this, where you had to, yes, say, okay, I'm not going to revert back to old coping mechanisms, which were not working anymore, numbing out, sweeping things under the rug. You're going to deal with this head on. You were going to try and process some of the events that you had been through, but also have an outlet for them to come out. Now, very, very important, but at what point did you start to say to yourself, okay, I've now crossed the bridge of fear or whatever it was to challenge myself to be able to do this art component? At what point did you say, I need to start sharing this with the world?
Yeah, I never wanted to share with people. The first ones that I did back in 2014, there was a paramedic in the back of the ambulance with a dead body on the stretcher, and the ghost of this patient is sitting in the airway seat, and this paramedic has gloved hands on his head, and it's based on an event that I had. And when I finished it, I'm like, God, I'm not going to share this with anybody. Like, this is a paramedic being vulnerable with gloved hands on his head. There's a ghost in it. Like, this is just weird. It's a weird picture. I'm not going to share with anybody. Totally expecting that my fellow heroes, infallible heroes, would look at it and think, damn, what are you doing? Why are you showing chinks in our armor? You can't show that to people. But I shared it anyways, just because many months later, I didn't share it initially. It was very cathartic for me to create that. There's two parts of that, but of that picture. It's called Trauma Code 1 and Trauma Code 2. Those are the first two pictures I did. And months later, I decided to share it. Once I started feeling a little bit better and creating many, many other art pieces since then, I just thought it kind of looks cartoony. It looks kind of cool. I'm going to share it just to see what happens. And that's when I realized that, many other people connect to it and are experiencing the same thing that I am. And that was very healing for me. So when I did that, when I started sharing the artwork with other people, it was very, that alone was a healing process for me, because that really gave me validation in that I'm not unusual for having these experiences or feeling this way. It's actually quite, I don't know if it's normal, because I don't think everybody is going to have trauma that does this work or experience the same symptoms that I did. But many of us do. And that really brought me validation and a lot of healing for myself.
And the seed was planted to continue to move forward. Now, from that point on, did you tell yourself that you were going to be more open and authentic about your healing process and the work that you were doing? How did that continue from that point on?
Yeah, well, I have to be authentic. So when I create the artwork, I need to do that in order for the healing to happen. The artwork is the result of my therapy, right? So in order for the therapy to be effective, I really need to dump what I'm feeling onto that picture, and I need to be authentic to myself. Otherwise, it's not going to be a healing process for me. So I'm not gratuitous. I don't add gore. I don't add trauma to my artwork to sensationalize it. When I create that type of artwork, it's really for my own benefit, and it is the result of my healing process. And I think because of that, people don't know that I'm a paramedic, right? So I'll get emails from people like, how do you know that this stuff happens? Like, how do you know, how can you get inside my head this way? You're an artist creating emergency services artwork. How do you know? No, because no one else would know about this, whatever this particular thing that you did the art piece about nobody would know. Like nobody knows. Like we don't even talk about that. How do you know? And then I tell them, well, no, because this is my own therapy. I'm a paramedic. This is my process. This is how I get this stuff out of my head. So I have to be authentic and real, and I don't hold back. I don't think, okay, what are people going to like? Are people going to be offended by this? I don't think that at all. Sometimes I worry about it, and sometimes I do offend people, and some people don't get it. But I don't create artwork for other people. I don't create it. Well, my therapy artwork, I don't do that, which is the most popular images that I create. I don't do that for other people. I do it for myself. And I think that's why people connect to it, because it's so authentic.
Now, your artwork, I'm sure in the beginning, when you first started to do this, very much had the role or the look of, okay, I'm doing this to heal. What does creating art now look like for you? Because you've grown now over time.
Yeah.
So
I still use the artwork to heal, though. I still have like, what human doesn't have emotions? And recently I've experienced a lot of grief and a lot of loss in my life, and that has been reflective in my artwork. So I'm going to continue to use my art as a tool to express my emotions, and my emotions don't stop. I have processed many of the traumas that I've had as an emergency worker, but I have trauma is another part of my life. And I'm going to continue to express that. It's not so much expressing it, it's purging it, really, is what I do. I process that trauma in the artwork. And no matter what those experiences are, not necessarily emergency services. So I don't think there's really an end to it. I'm lucky that I've discovered that tool for myself, and I will continue to use that to purge and process the human experience that I have and that everyone else has. I'm just lucky that I have a tool to do that, and that other people connect to it. I play guitar too, but I'm not very good at it. So people don't ask me to, and I use that as a way to process too. Like that focuses on another part of my brain, but people don't invite me on their podcast to play my guitar. Thank God, because it would be a horrible podcast. But there's many things that I do for that. I'm just lucky that people really connect to the artwork.
Well, if you do want to come back for episode 2 with your guitar, and people,
it'll be a very short episode.
Well, hey, you know what? I'll always say, if the guests want you to come back and serenade us with your love, I mean, definitely into it. Now, for you, I love how for many, many years, it's taken you obviously to get to this point where you can tell you're still going through the challenges of life, of trauma, of grief, of loss. There is always going to be challenges in life, but you're right. You've gained a very healthy coping style or mechanism to get that out. And I can tell just by listening to you right now, you're doing really well. And the unfortunate part for first responders, when they first get into the job, I don't think a lot of us are really taught how to cope in a healthy fashion. So we fall apart and into PTSD, where that really needs to shift, and we need to be given the right platforms or tools, or at least awareness and knowledge into ourselves, so that we can cope with this stuff. Because I can tell right now you're flourishing.
I am now. I certainly wasn't, when I was in the depth of it. I couldn't leave my house, and I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't, so I wasn't always flourishing. And you're right. I feel really good now. Like I feel like I'm in a great space, and I'm excited about, the new education I'm going to be getting. And, I'm going to share what I learned to my, I'm going to focus on my peers and fellow emergency workers. And, I really want to focus on, addictions, because I know a lot of us, turn to drugs and alcohol to treat this. And, spousal support. My trauma ruined my marriage. I got divorced because of my trauma. I was such a horrible person to be with that it ended my marriage. And that's horrible. And I know that's very common. That happens to many of us. And that's something I really want to focus on too. And a big part of my program is family counseling. And I'm really going to try to address that to peers that are maybe in that brink of of the lack of understanding of what's happening on both sides, to really kind of hope to help them navigate that. So yeah, I'm very excited. So the point is that I wasn't always in this position that I am now. I certainly wasn't. I was in a very bad place where I couldn't go to the grocery store. I couldn't go get groceries. I couldn't be around people. Being in crowds freaked me out. I didn't want to be near people. I just wanted to. And big part of my therapy was that, my goal for that day was to walk outside of my house and go across the street and buy milk. Right? If I could do that, that was a success. Hated it. Couldn't do it. Like for a long time, I couldn't do it. And it was a struggle for me to even do that. But through therapy and through practice and through the help of my mental health team, my life is completely different now. But it always hasn't been that way.
No, it hasn't. And I appreciate how you paint the picture of how things used to be. Now, for many of us, unfortunately, we touched on this early on too. Many of us get stuck in those PTSD cycles and we lose it all. We lose the career, we lose the family, we lose the loved ones, we lose ourselves. We never really get healthy. We might fall into addiction or suicide or whatever the case is. But for you, you've challenged yourself into a space now of post-traumatic growth. And it's very important to recognize, yes, in one hand, life for you at one point was not well. And my exact same situation as you, I wore the exact same shoes as you. Life for me was not well for many, many years in the depths of PTSD. Challenging myself to do things that are uncomfortable that I wouldn't normally do has helped me to grow in this space, much like what we're even doing right now, and just having a deep conversation about what our PTSD looks like, owning some of our stuff as men, as people that, first responders, and acknowledging that, yeah, it looked like that and we're doing it differently now. Does that mean that we're still having, every day is a good day? Absolutely not. We still have hard days. We still have PTSD moments, but for the most part, our PTSD growth looks a hell of a lot better than it did in the past. Now, your ability to process the loss, the grief, and all of those things, are those more hard now because of PTSD, or do you have the right tools in place to process some of the difficult life challenges?
I think it's easier now because now I feel like I have a tool belt where I can recognize what's, for me, my day is set when I wake up in the morning. I wake up and then my reality kind of downloads into my brain, and then the emotion follows. And then that kind of gauges how my day is. Right. Just a few days ago on Saturday, I woke up and man, I felt super depressed and super sad. And I don't know why, but I recognized it. And I know, okay, when I feel kind of in the dumps that day, I need to go out and do stuff. Right. So I need to go outside and do something I wasn't planning on doing that day. And that's what I did. So I got out of the house. I went downtown. I went to the art gallery. I watched a concert, and it totally got me out of my funk versus I'm just not going to get out of bed today, which is what I would have done. So I recognize those things of, I wake up and I'm like, I'm feeling really anxious today. I have an action plan for when I feel anxious. I have an action plan for when I feel depressed. I have an action plan for when I feel super happy. So I have the tools now that I recognize what's happening and I know what to do about it. And I'm lucky that I didn't always have that. And now I do.
I think action plans are great. And whether you want to call them an action plan or an accountability plan, whatever the case is, it's the tools on the tool belt that let you know that if you're having a hard day or you're getting rocked with depression, you've got to embrace the thing that you don't want to do. Get out of the bed, go move the body, work out, do whatever it is, go get some sunlight, go outside. Like you said, go to a concert, whatever the case is, and you will actually feel better. But unfortunately for some of us, it's really hard. Now for you, because I want to keep continuing on some of the positive things that are happening for you in your life. Again, I have to be conscious of time too as well here. What other doors have opened up for yourself now that you've agreed to embrace art and you're growing and the communities behind you? What other doors are opening up for yourself now for your own growth?
Oh, there's lots. It's it's really changed my life doing this artwork. I'm writing books. I'm going to be writing I write articles often for magazines. I'm going to be involved with hopefully with a school in Texas, writing something about post-traumatic growth for a paramedic school down there. I'm traveling around the world exhibiting my artwork. I'm involved in a lot of think tanks that are working to change the workplace environments for emergency services. I'm involved in a lot of organizations that are promoting and improving mental health environments for emergency workers. So yeah, it's really opened up a lot of opportunities for me. And I really feel lucky that it's funny because the exact opposite I thought was going to happen when I started creating the artwork, where I thought people would reject it, but it's changed my life. It really has changed my life. And I feel super lucky and people get my artwork tattooed on them. People ask me, is it okay if I get this art piece tattooed? I'm like, are you kidding me? I think any artist, if someone wants to get your artwork tattooed on their body forever, like that just blows my mind. I'm like, God, of course, I'm honored that you would want to do that you connect with it that much. The only thing I ask is that show me a picture of it when you're done. I want to see what it looks like. Like that's incredible that people connect with it that deeply. And I'm super honored and super humbled by that people want to do that. Lots of opportunities.
This journey is so amazing that way. The amount of fear that we have to take that first step is always there. But once we do it and we start to gain the comfort, we soon after see just how different life can be. And a lot of this too has to play into, how you look at yourself or your self-worth or your belief system about yourself. How have those things improved over the years because of these doors opening up?
Yeah, I think it's really a sense of values, right? For me, my values were rocked, right? Everything, what I felt, my sense of values I had to redefine my values. I lost my job, I lost my marriage, I lost my dad all within a few months. My dog died, so my entire world was turned upside down and I needed to reevaluate my values and reestablish what those were. And I couldn't do that by myself. So I did that with the team. I had a mental health team going through therapy. I had, my psychologist, I had a physical therapist, I had an occupational therapist. I had a whole team I had a kinesiologist. I had all these people that were my mental health team that helped me rebuild. Like I said, I couldn't leave my house. I couldn't leave my world was rocked and turned upside down. And I really needed to rebuild my foundation, and those people helped me do that. And now I have a totally new sense of perspective, and what things are important to me are not what was important to me before. I have altered senses of value and perspective through this treatment, and for the better.
I am incredibly proud of you to hear your journey, hear the struggle that was the journey that made up most of this journey for most of your life, and why you chose to serve and to do the things you did and your accomplishments over those 20 years, but so insanely proud of you for where you are right now in this journey. So thank you for doing this. I mean, I've lost friends over this stuff, and I'm sure you have too. So we all know the pain that exists with seeing friends that don't make it through it. So I applaud you, Daniel, for how you've flipped this into a positive. When is retirement? Do we know? Can we celebrate this yet?
God, what is there? I'm never going to retire. Like I'm never going to not do anything.
Retirement from the chapter you're now leaving.
Yeah, so I'm right in transition of that. So it's right in flux right now. So I'm going to be starting school in October. So I'm doing counseling therapist program. Is 2 years long out of Vancouver. Yeah. Then I'll be registered counselor, which I'm excited about. And then, but yeah, I haven't officially left the fire department yet either. So it's kind of this transition phase. So I don't think I'm really going to say I'm retired until I'm ever, because I'm never going to, like, I think once I'm a therapist or a counseling therapist for emergency workers, that's something I'm going to do forever. I don't know. I thought the same thing about being a paramedic too, and that didn't happen that way. But I'm 55, and if I can get 20 or 30 years out of that, I'm probably pretty happy.
And I guess maybe I'm looking at this even from maybe through my own lens, which I should step back from in this moment and just kind of, because for me, when I retired, so much more healing happened when I finally retired and I finally said enough. Now you're still kind of serving, you're still kind of fulfilling that role, and you've been able to heal. Have you ever asked yourself what healing is going to look like once you're done?
Yeah, and that's a good topic. And, we don't really think of ourselves as, so many of us connect to what we do as to who we are, right? I am a paramedic. I am a police officer. I am a firefighter. So we don't think, well, if I don't do that, who am I? What am I? If I'm not, I have no choice. I don't have an option not to do this job. This is all I know. I've been doing this forever. I don't know what else to do. And when it's suggested that maybe you should do something else, that's an offensive comment to many people. Like, how dare you say I can't be a firefighter? That's like telling me that I can't be who I am, right? But what's the alternative? Are you going to stay in that position to the point where you're going to kill yourself? Is that better than going to discovering a new chapter in your life and maybe finding something else that's as equally rewarding that you're just not aware of? But it's just such a foreign concept. No, I don't work on car anymore. I'm not on the ambulance or the fire truck anymore. So I stopped doing that. My psychologist won't let me do emergency services anymore, which I'm totally okay with. But that was a difficult transition for me. I'm like, well, if I don't do that, then who am I? Like, what am I going to do? I don't know what else to do. Right. So that's a really difficult transition to go through. And for many of us, it's not even an acceptable option. Right. They will stay in it until they literally die, which is scary, but it needs to be an option. Maybe you should pursue some other things that you can renew that fulfillment and that sense of value. Maybe you just don't know what the available options are out there. And there are a lot of options out there. There's a lot of people that go on utilizing the experiences that they have as emergency workers to do incredible things. So it's not like you're leaving that. You're not going to quit that job and become a career basket weaver. You're going to utilize the experiences that you have into other areas. Like what I'm doing. The experiences I have, I'm going to become a therapist, and I'm going to utilize what I've learned in my experiences to help my peers. And the experiences that I've had are going to benefit my next career.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's an option that many people may not consider, that maybe it is time to get out.
Well, and it ushers in a deeper conversation into the thoughts about, how do you identify yourself and what you do in your life? And are you willing to give that up? Because a lot of us identify, once we get into first responder work, and we've done it for years, as the cop, as the paramedic, and no way could we leave that, right? But then you start to look at, okay, why am I not willing to leave that? Has the pain and suffering becomes so comfortable that I don't know how to do anything else differently? I don't know how to experience joy anymore, or maybe joy all of a sudden becomes uncomfortable to look at, experiencing joy, because you've become so bittered and grouchy and constantly angry, right? And there are layers of that to the journey. I think even for myself, I really had to challenge myself and say, okay, I don't like the person I'm becoming anymore. How do I shift out? I need to make that jump, that leap of faith.
No, I think a lot of people, they identify with their trauma as well, right? So it comes from, okay, if I'm not a paramedic, who am I? And that changes to, okay, if I'm not a paramedic with PTSD, then who am I? Right? So then there's barriers to even recovery. And that's a deep hole to be in, where, if I'm not a traumatized paramedic, because I've been in that space for so long, then what am I? And options just need to come forward. Well, why don't you be? And so, and I've heard my peers tell me that. I'm like, what am I going to, like, who am I if I'm not this? I'm like, well, do you want to identify with the paramedic you are now? Or do you want to be the paramedic you were before your trauma? What would you rather be? And he says, well, I can't be the paramedic I was before my trauma. I know, but you can be something else without trauma. And there's lots of, and I think we just don't know what opportunities are out there for us. And there's organizations. There's one in Australia that's great. A couple guys there, they're police officers, and God, I wish I remember the name of their organization. Beyond the Badge, maybe. But they started off with police officers, and they find them work. Most of the work that they do is in safety and security. So these big organizations, these big corporate organizations, will hire, retired police officers that were retired because of PTSD. And because of the vigilance, I think many of us could go into any office building and walk through it and tell them where their danger spots are. Like, these are some dangerous areas, just because of the constant vigilance that we have. And that is seen as an asset. So this organization, they can't fulfill the requests enough. Like, they don't have enough retired or emergency workers that were forced out of their work because of their trauma to fill these positions, because these big companies recognize that as an asset. And most of the time, these are more higher paying jobs than they were when, as a police officer or a paramedic, and they're extremely valued. So you're in a position where you have value, you have purpose, you're well rewarded, and you are actually using the experiences that you had as an emergency worker to your benefit, right? You're using that trauma as a tool now. Now you're not walking your trauma. I mean, the trauma's not walking you. You're now walking your trauma, which is another piece that I did, right? So there's organizations that are doing that, but sometimes it's difficult for us to recognize and see those opportunities that are available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pain and the suffering, the future becomes very hard to see.
Yeah.
This has been a phenomenal podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been God. Well, if you take out the pee breaks, it's almost been a couple hours.
Don't tell anybody these things, Daniel.
I don't tell people what the pee breaks we've been taking. Yeah, it's been my best thing. I can even still keep talking about it.
I know, so could I.
It's definitely a passion, yeah.
The main thing is, and I always try to relay this to the people that are listening, because we get so many different people that are listening. We have people that are unaware as to what this is going to look like. They're just starting out in their career. We get people that are in it, and they're just starting to either become unaware fully as to the person they're becoming, or they are starting to gain awareness into their PTSD and starting to see that things are, not going as well as they thought, all the way out to the people who have retired and they're now on their healing journey, right? And the one thing I always want to come back to is the biggest thing that's helped me in this journey is to support others and to give back without expectation. And I think that's something that's been really fundamental in my own recovery. I don't know if you ever came up with this concept or where it fits into your life, or if it's helped you with your journey. I'm going to give you the floor here before I dive into another train of thought, though.
Yes, I guess a lot of people follow my artwork now. So I have a social media, I have a pretty large following on social media, and I almost get requests daily for people wanting to use my artwork for whatever. And I offer it for free. If people are developing a program to help support emergency workers in their area, I don't charge for that. I don't. So I try to support people with similar mindsets. Now, if you want to use my artwork to promote your mental health or your psychology business, well, then now you can purchase a commercial licensing agreement for that, because then you're going to profit from that. But I try to promote, if there's an organization if there's a program or an organization that I think is going to be really beneficial for other emergency workers, then I will promote that, and I will share it on my social media. And one thing I've learned in this world of mental health support for emergency workers, there's a lot of politics in it, which I was surprised. And I have to make a conscious effort not to start walking down that path of the political. I always think what's the benefit has to be to the end user, that police officer, that paramedic, that firefighter that is struggling. It's about them. It's not about, when it comes to promoting my artwork, it's about them, not about my artwork. And that's kind of my guiding force for that, is that that person that fellow emergency worker that needs the help, that may not have the capacity to do that themselves. And sometimes that gets lost in the world of financing and budgets and grant money when it's coming to supporting the mental health checkbox of emergency workers, when often those things don't get down to the level where the men and women that actually need it. So that's, I think I may have gone on my own weird tangent with your question, but
no,
that's kind of how my brain works.
You answered it perfectly. I couldn't have said it better myself. Some people might listen to that and they might go, okay, I don't really get it. And that's okay. But for me, I listened to it and I wholeheartedly agreed right out until the end of that statement. Absolutely. Yeah. And that is kind of the unfortunate part of mental health, is it's become a very hot button topic. And there is unfortunately a lot of money to be made in this space. But again, we both look at it from a perspective of the person that matters the most is the one on the receiving end of this help that we're putting forward. And that was something I told myself too. I mean, even for my own podcast, it's cost me thousands of dollars to get the equipment to do this. And I don't expect anything out of it. But at the same time, it's definitely become a passion project where I'm seeing the positive impacts and how it's helping others, much like your art. So as we wind this up, what would be that one last thing for you, Daniel, where from your seat now in your own recovery that you would love to give back this gift, whether it's advice or awareness or just a personal story that can maybe help someone in those shoes that might be suffering or going through some of the struggles of trauma?
Yeah, I think luckily there's a lot more awareness now with mental health, and most people are aware, emergency workers are aware of there's a lot of programs, organizations have posters up on the wall. But I think a big thing is if you recognize that the whole goal is to eliminate suicide, right? That's the goal. So if you sense that you may have some of these symptoms, you can go on your phone and you can Google online PTSD self-assessment. Tons of stuff will come up. SIPCERT here in Canada will have like a 35 question thing that you can come up. You answer the questions, and based on what you answer, it will give you suggestions on what you can do. Now, if you are really connecting, or if you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm having suicidal ideation, then please, if you have the resources, get evaluated. See a psychologist, see a mental health professional that can assess you, diagnose you, and then you can get the treatment. I think awareness is really, and verbalizing the awareness and bringing it forward is really important, because if you're not aware of what's happening and you can't define it, then it's really difficult to recover from it. So if you feel that and maybe, if you feel like, okay, yeah, I've been kind of connecting with some of this stuff, maybe you're just depressed, maybe you have depression, maybe you are just feeling sad, but get checked out. I think people should get a mental checkup every year, just like, if you're over 50, you're supposed to get a medical checkup every year or every 2 years. I think people should do the same thing, even if you're feeling good. I still see my psychologist every month just to check in. And I think that should be a totally normal thing. Or, if you've had a few days that you're feeling sad or depressed or super anxious more than normal, go see your psychologist. Just check in and say, hey, yeah, this is how I'm feeling. And they might be able to recognize things and maybe do a full-blown assessment on you. It's like, hey, yeah, you've got something going on here. We need to get this looked at, and let's fix this now before it gets too deep. And I think I'd like to normalize that mindset versus, okay, well, now I'm suicidal, I need to talk to somebody. It's like, yeah, why don't you, let's let's maybe talk to somebody way before that. Maybe check in with your mental health professional. That should be a norm, I think. So that would be my advice to people is if you really feel like you're not feeling normal, whatever normal is for you, or if you think maybe, or even if you had a really bad shift, a really bad call, and you can't seem to shake it, get a hold of, if you have resources, if you have access to an employment assistance program, use it. Or if you have a psychologist that you can connect with, use it. And they might say, yep, you know what, you're just having a bad day. You're not showing, maybe, I don't know. But I think the important thing is acknowledging what's happening. So you can get treatment if needed sooner than later. And it's totally okay. That should be normalized.
There is no shame behind getting help. We
No.
do it in all areas of our life. Sometimes, though, we don't do it for our mental health. We take our car into the shop to get regular maintenance on it. We go to the gym. We pay memberships to keep our body well. We need to.
I heard this great analogy of if you have a dog, like if you're a dog person or a pet person, you are going to take care of that. Like if you're a good dog owner, you know, that dog's limping for, you know, more than 4 days or 5 days, you're going to take that dog to the doctor. Like, hey, there's something wrong with my dog. And they'll take a look, and, you know, if they're pooping weird, you're going to change their food, right? You take better care of your dog or your pet than most people do of their own mental health. And I thought that was an interesting analogy to make, where that's totally normal to be you're a good dog owner, but we're going to neglect our mental health that way, which is weird. Well, it's not weird. I wish it was weird. But I wish we could normalize that a bit more, where it's okay to do mental health checkups every once in a while.
I agree with you.
To stay on top of stuff.
Great analogy. I've never heard that one before. And it's so true. Now, for people that choose to support you, and I don't know kind of how they can do that, but can we talk about where to go to view your art, and what kind of options exist out there to show their support for you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I think I have my website, dansunphotos.com. So DANSUN. It's the first three letters of my first and last name. Sometimes I refer that to my stripper name, my Dansun, but dansunphotos.com is my artist name. And you can see all my artwork is on there. And if there's artwork on there that really connects with you, you can purchase stuff right from there. I do have 3 art books, hardcover coffee table art books that are available on that website as well. And I'm working on my 4th book. And those are great because they're big and they're proper color, they're proper resolution. And I have the narrative, and then I include comments from our peers in there. And those are pretty emotional books to go through. They're also good ways to communicate with family members of what it's like to be in our world. So yeah, if you want to support the work that I'm doing, just visit my website. If something connects there, you can, if you want, or just follow me on Facebook. Support me that way.
Beautiful. Is something else that you just touched on real quick, and I just want to drive this point home there, and you may not agree. You may agree to this. Is there is a part of the journey with PTSD where you don't know how to speak about the struggle that you're going through. Sometimes, for yourself, for example, an artist, if this artwork really resonates with you, or whatever the case is out there, having this to at least let someone know, hey, I don't yet have the words to express what I'm going through, but this means a lot to me, can be a really good way to start kind of conversation, or at least moving towards some of the areas that you're going to need to tackle. What are your thoughts on that? Has your artwork ever been used that way?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, quite a bit. I know a lot of therapists use my artwork as part of their reintegration therapy. And many organizations like fire departments and EMS and police, they'll have copies of my art book in their lunchrooms, where it kind of broaches the topic of mental health without saying, okay, come here, everyone, we're going to talk about mental health. It's it can be done at your own pace. So a lot of people use my art book for that, or they do use it for spousal support and family therapy, where peers would take the book to their families and say, look, go through this book to get a better understanding of what my world is like. So I think the artwork is used quite a bit and a lot of presenters use it in their presentations for, if they're talking about mental health or PTSD or post-traumatic growth, or they utilize it quite a bit for that, which is great. I think it's wonderful that it's being used in those ways.
As it should be. Like we were talking about, there is very much a stage where you don't have a voice. Not yet.
Well, it's difficult. It's a complex, and I think that's really what I'm able to do is to visualize a really complex emotion or feeling and visualize it. The image pops into my head, and then I try to recreate that image. So I guess that's something that I can do.
One of the very cool things too, and this is something that you and I originally connected over, was we both came together initially because of this idea of, hey, let's help really challenge the stigma behind who has PTSD. And something I'm actually somewhat excited about announcing is that you and I are actually in the future going to work on something where I can get pictures of people that openly acknowledge that they have PTSD that are in the first responder world. And I will be your beautiful little admin person, and I will collect all of these photos and get them off to you so you can create a piece of artwork that shows all of the different faces that have PTSD, and we openly acknowledge it, and that there's no shame or stigma behind acknowledging that this is what the struggle looks like, and most of us carry it and we're okay with it.
I'm excited about that project. It's I did something similar in April of 2020, beginning of COVID. So I have the COVID selfie project where I did 1,000 portraits of emergency workers around the world wearing their masks, so we all look the same. People were sending me these selfies of them from all around the world. I think, look, we all look the same. We all have the same uniform. We're unified in this fight against this virus. And then I created this 1,000 portraits, which you can get for free on my website, a 40 by 60 full resolution version of it. But it's 62 people or 62 countries, 1,113 people. There's a dog in there being held by a nurse. And it's 1,000 portraits from all around the world. Yeah, and it's a very unifying picture where, we all look the same. And I love that idea for that, where I want to do something similar with these portraits of people that are saying, yes, I have post-traumatic stress, and this is what I look like, right? And I think it's a great idea, and I want to do something similar to build this big collage and paint each individual one, and maybe even put the city that they're from, so people can see that it's from all around the world.
Absolutely.
And I think that would be a good tool to normalize. I really try to normalize this instead of making it, which I think will minimize the stigma as well. If we normalize what's happening instead of just thoughts and prayers, it's like, well, we haven't even talked about this, Nate, about investigating stuff to try to prevent. There's a lot of people doing that kind of work to prevent suicides by investigating them instead of just doing the thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, that's going to be...
That's a whole other podcast right there.
Yeah, I mean, bring your guitar for that one. And if the guitar doesn't go well, we'll just flip into investigating suicides and why they happen.
Once I scroll Twinkle Twinkle Little Star enough times, and maybe we should talk about something else. I'm like, sure, let's talk about suicide investigation.
Perfect. The life of a trauma worker, hey? The things we'll talk about. But no, an absolute honor to connect with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for challenging yourself to heal, to get to a place where you can present yourself, this version of yourself, to the world, someone who is geared towards helping others through art, in sharing your story. And not only that, but setting your sights too on getting the academics behind you to continue to give back from the role of a therapist. I'm really excited to see you grow and can continue to grow in this space. And I think, like we talked about earlier, there's going to be more doors that just continue to open up for you. So when I say I love where you're at, my friend, I truly, truly mean it. So thank you for sharing today.
Great. Thanks, Nate. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Thank you for joining us on season 2. If you are a first responder with an incredible story into post-traumatic stress, please reach out and connect with myself. Season 2 is based on your story. And if you want to step up to the plate and share your story with the world, I would be more than honored to help you do that. Thank you for your continued support with this project, and thank you for tuning in today.